So the next step then is to talk about taking some of those large product backlog items and splitting them. And we're just going to focus in on a few different techniques, but there are many techniques. And this is, part of, growth as a product owner is to learn different backlog splitting techniques. There's some good references on training.vertigue.com. But, depending on how you count, there's easily 20 different techniques for splitting. One of the most obvious ones, and which is not really even considered a technique per se, because it's so obvious, is if in your product backlog item, you have some sort of a list of and or in the list. So as a job seeker, I can upload my PDF, Word, or text resume. That's a list of 3 different file formats. And often that's just how you split it based on that list. As a job seeker, I can upload my PDF resume. As a job seeker, I can upload my Word resume. As a job seeker, I can upload my text resume. Now, remember, though, that we're only splitting big ones, okay? And the reason is simply so that you have some small ones ready for the next sprint. It's a just-in-time process. So, for example, if you have, I don't know, let's say 40 product backlog items right now. I haven't counted them, but let's say it's 35 or 40 backlog items. That number is fine. Like there's no requirement to have 200 backlog items, for example. What you can do is you can say, well, we've got, 7 or 8 that are ready. The team is going to take 2 or 3 of them, work on them. Let's replenish those 2 or 3. So we'll take a look at one of the uncertain ones or one of the large ones that we as a product owner care about from a business perspective. And take that one or take 2 of them that are big and uncertain and split those to replenish the small ones. Okay? And that ongoing refinement, splitting, and replenishment means that you don't necessarily grow the size of your product backlog. Now, sometimes it does grow because you get feedback from other stakeholders and so on and so forth, but there's nothing inherent about a product backlog growing. And in fact, often people do too much refinement up front when they don't really need to. All right, so how do we do splitting? Okay, again, there's a little bit of a reference on the Miro board, and this is in the section called User Story Splitting. Basically, we've got a little handout that illustrates 4 different common splitting techniques. So the gray circles represent one big original user story, and then you divvy that up based on the idea in the diagram. So, for example, you have a user story that represents a long multi-step process, and you take each step of that process, and each one becomes a separate, smaller user story. That's the first one here. Or you have a user story that represents some sort of thing that happens, but hidden underneath are some rules or error conditions that you want to handle. And so you take each of those cases and take those and split those out into separate user stories. Sorry, forgot about examples. So in the user story process step, like a user uploading their resume, there's the step 1, which is the actual upload itself. Step 2 might be having it reviewed by a moderator of some sort or an AI system. And then step 3 is actually publishing it. And each step could be a separate user story. With rules or errors, login, there's a successful login, there's an unsuccessful login, and then there's a whole bunch of unsuccessful logins which lock the login, right? And that's case 1, case 2, and case 3. And each of those could become a separate user story. Role or persona. This is the idea that you've got a kind of generic user story that applies to a lot of different roles in your product. But when you split it out and think about how each user specifically uses your product, there are differences that are important. So for example, a job seeker who has a free account versus a job seeker who has a premium account, and what happens to them when they upload their resume, for example. Maybe it doesn't get reviewed, it just gets posted automatically. And then finally, user options. So the user is faced with a choice in how they proceed in your product. And again, each choice becomes a separate user story. So as a job seeker, I can choose to upload my Word or my PDF or my text resume with filling in fields online.